When I was in 8th grade, our school arranged a field trip to a nature preserve about an hour and a half outside our town. It was late September, warm during the day, but the wind carried that crisp, dry bite that hinted fall was close. I wasn't particularly excited about the trip, but it meant skipping math class and hanging out with my friends, so I went. The preserve was massive. Trails winding through the trees, a large visitor center with glass walls, and even a few wooden observation towers. Our science teacher, Mr. Walton, had signed us up for a guided learning hike through the woods with a park ranger. It was supposed to be educational. And honestly, it was for the first hour. I was in a group with 3 of my classmates, Logan, Paige, and Jamie. Logan was the funny one. Paige loved taking pictures of everything, and Jamie was my closest friend in school at the time. We were typical 8th graders, bored easily, restless, and honestly, a bit too confident. Our guide, Ranger Don, had the kind of voice that could put a hummingbird to sleep. He droned on about native plants and fungus, while we shuffled along, more focused on keeping our phones hidden. They weren't allowed, but of course, we all had them. At one point, the trail split, and the ranger said we'd go left, circle around, and meet at the base camp later. The left path was gravel, well kept, and wide enough for a group. But the right path was thinner, overgrown, and faded. It had a wooden sign hanging loosely on a post. The words were so worn out, you could barely read them. It said something like, "Lower Marsh Path, closed beyond this point." That's when Logan made the suggestion. He grinned, nudged me, and said, "Let's check out the creepy trail." Just for a minute. I should have said no. So should Paige. Jamie hesitated too, but peer pressure is real when you're 13. So we told the rest of the group we'd be right back and slipped away while they weren't looking. At first, it was fun. The trail was narrow and felt like something out of a movie. The trees were taller, denser. Sunlight filtered through like streaks on glass. We laughed, made up stories about ghosts in the woods, and Paige kept snapping photos with her phone. But the trail didn't loop back like we thought. It curved, dipped, and led us down a gentle slope until suddenly the air felt cooler and heavier. That's when we saw the first sign something wasn't right. There was a backpack, just lying beside the trail. It looked like it had been there a while. One strap torn, dirt smeared across the front, and one of the zippers open. Paige reached down and picked up a small notebook from the ground nearby. The pages were damp and stuck together, but there was writing, messy and quick. I only saw a few words before she dropped it. "Still out there. No one listens. Can't go back." Jamie looked at me and asked if I thought it was a joke. I shrugged, trying to play it off, but my stomach had already tightened. We agreed to turn around, but by then, the trail behind us felt different, darker, quieter, too quiet. As we walked back, I kept hearing what sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy, not behind us, but off the trail, in the woods. Paige kept spinning around, trying to see if someone was there, but the trees were thick and shadows moved like animals. Then we saw him. Just off to the right, maybe 20 feet into the trees, there was a man. He wasn't doing anything, just standing behind a tree. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening. He wasn't dressed like a ranger or a hiker, just plain jeans and a dirty gray hoodie. His face was hidden, but he was watching us. None of us moved for a second. I could hear Paige breathing hard beside me. Then Logan whispered, "Go. Now." We turned around and started walking faster. Not running. Not yet. I think we were still convincing ourselves it was nothing. Maybe just a lost camper. Maybe someone living out there. But then the sound started following us. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, deliberate footsteps. Faster now. That's when Jamie broke into a sprint, and the rest of us followed. We ran until the trails split again, but it wasn't the same fork from before. Everything looked different now, unfamiliar. We had no clue which way led back. Logan wanted to keep running, but I pulled him toward the left, hoping we'd at least find a road or sign. What we found instead was a small cabin, almost invisible behind overgrown brush. It looked abandoned, windows shattered, roof sagging. But there was smoke coming from a rusted metal chimney. Jamie whispered, "We can't go in there." But we were out of breath, scared, and unsure if the man was still following us. We didn't have time to decide. A loud snap of a branch behind us, not far. We rushed into the cabin. It stank inside. Mold, old wood, and something else. Metallic, like rusted metal, or maybe blood. I'll never forget that smell. There was a table with rope on it, a single chair, and scrawled on the wall with what looked like charcoal were words. "Don't trust the trails. Don't go alone. He waits where the light can't reach." That's when Paige started crying. Logan stood frozen near the door, listening. And then we all heard the soft knock. Not on the door, on the window. He was standing right there, face hidden by the hood, hand still on the glass. He wasn't trying to break in, just standing, watching. Jamie grabbed a piece of broken chair leg. I pulled Paige away from the window. Logan whispered, "We have to go. Now." We bolted out the back, through thorn bushes and under branches, not following a trail anymore, just running. We didn't stop until we saw a chain-link fence and the back of a utility truck parked near the preserve entrance. Two park workers were talking, and when we reached them, they looked at us like we were crazy. We told them everything. They didn't say much, just nodded, told us to wait, and radioed for someone. Eventually, a ranger and our teacher showed up. They were angry, of course, thought we were playing a prank or just wandered off to skip the hike. We never saw the man again. No one found the cabin when they went looking. I'm not sure they really tried. Or maybe they just didn't want to admit something like that existed so close to a school zone. But every time I go near woods now, I think about that man. The way he stood, silent, watching. Maybe he was just someone living off the grid. Maybe he was dangerous. But one thing's for sure. He didn't want to be seen. And we weren't supposed to find him. It was supposed to be a normal school field trip, a visit to the local history museum, a day of learning and exploration. But for me, it would be a day that would stay with me forever, in a way I could never have predicted. It was a chilly autumn day, the kind where the sun seems to shine just enough to make you forget about the cold air. My history class, about 30 of us, was excited for the trip. But there was one person who made it all the more unpleasant. John, or JN, as I'll call him. He was a constant annoyance, always bullying, always looking for trouble. And, of course, he was in my group for the trip. The museum itself was a fascinating place, filled with artifacts that seemed to whisper stories from the past. Ancient relics, old-fashioned clothing, and strange items that had lived through centuries. It was the kind of place where you could easily get lost in time, but that wasn't what I was thinking about. No, I was too busy trying to avoid John, who seemed determined to make this trip as miserable as possible for me. We were given some free time after the tour, and I wandered off to explore the exhibits on my own. One exhibit in particular caught my attention, a display of an old miniature town. There was a glass wall around it, and I leaned in closer, fascinated by the tiny, intricate details of the buildings. As I studied the scene, I felt a sudden push from behind. Before I could even react, I was falling. I crashed against the glass railing just inches from the model town, narrowly missing it. I looked up, and there was John, standing a few feet away, laughing. He had pushed me. I could hear his chuckles echoing in the room, but nobody else seemed to notice. Everyone was too busy staring at me as I struggled to get back on my feet. I could feel the eyes of the museum staff on me, and the woman in charge of the exhibit rushed over, scolding me for being careless. I tried to tell her it was John, but she didn't believe me. She thought I was trying to get attention. John, of course, had already disappeared into the crowd. I was furious, humiliated, but I had no choice but to pick up the fallen pieces of the exhibit and walk away. The whole thing felt wrong. It was as if I was being gaslighted in front of everyone. And though I didn't want to let it bother me, something about the way John had laughed stuck with me. It was a laugh that felt hollow, like there was something more to it than just a prank. The rest of the trip passed uneventfully, but as we boarded the bus to head back to school, I noticed something odd. John was sitting in the back, holding something in his hands. It was a small, old-fashioned hat, the kind that looked like it belonged in a museum exhibit. At first, I didn't think much of it. But when we got back to school and I checked my social media, I saw a Snapchat post from John. He was holding that same hat, grinning like a madman. I couldn't believe it. He had stolen the hat from the museum. I felt a knot in my stomach. And then the unease settled in. John hadn't just pushed me. There was something darker about him. Something that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. He had taken something that wasn't his, and I knew that would come back to haunt him. The next day, our history teacher addressed the theft. The museum had reported it, but no one knew who had taken the hat. John kept his usual smug demeanor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, that something was off about him. The class went on, but I couldn't focus. That's when things started to get strange. I went to my locker between classes, and when I opened it, I saw the hat. The same old, tattered hat, tucked behind my books, as though it had been placed there deliberately. My heart skipped a beat. I knew John had something to do with this, but why? Was he trying to frame me for the theft? Was he trying to make me feel like I was losing my mind? The more I thought about it, the more unsettling the whole situation became. I didn't want to get into trouble, and I didn't want to be part of whatever sick game John was playing. But I had to do something. I went straight to my history teacher and explained everything. How John had pushed me at the museum, how he had stolen the hat, and how he had planted it in my locker. At first, my teacher seemed skeptical, but as I spoke, I could see the recognition in his eyes. He knew something wasn't right with John. He had heard rumors about John's behavior, his past, and when I mentioned the Snapchat story, He nodded. He believed me. The hat was returned to the museum, and John was suspended for a week. But that wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, after John had been suspended, strange things started happening. I would be alone in the halls, and I could swear I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. Sometimes I'd feel a cold breeze on the back of my neck, even when the air was still. And at night, I would wake up to the feeling of someone watching me. But when I checked my room, it was always empty. One night, I decided to check my phone before bed, and I saw a message from an unknown number. The message was short but chilling. "You shouldn't have taken the hat. It doesn't belong to you." The text sent a shiver down my spine. It was then that I realized the hat wasn't just a piece of history. It was something more, something dark. John had disturbed something that was never meant to be touched. That was the last I saw of John. He disappeared from school shortly after, and no one knew where he went. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that presence, the same coldness that had followed me after the museum. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone, I can hear a faint laugh in the distance. A laugh that I know all too well. I was a sophomore in college when this happened. I'm not the paranoid type, but even now, years later, I still get uneasy walking alone at night. It all started when I signed up for a weekend photography trip offered through my elective course. It was optional, mostly for extra credit, but I was trying to boost my GPA, so I signed up without hesitation. The plan was simple. We'd head out to a scenic forest reserve about an hour outside campus and return by midnight. We'd photograph nature at dusk, the stars, maybe even wildlife. There were about 20 students on the roster and our photography professor, Mr. Dillon. We met at the campus parking lot around 6:30 p.m., and by 7 p.m., we were on the road in one of those small college-chartered shuttle buses. I didn't know many people, so I kept to myself, earbuds in, camera bag on my lap. We arrived just as the sun was setting. The forest was beautiful. Open trails, tall trees, a shallow creek that reflected the fading light. Mr. Dillon gave us a rundown, told us to stick in small groups or pairs, and reminded us that phone signal was spotty, so don't go too far. Everyone dispersed pretty quickly. I ended up paired with a girl named Nikki. We didn't know each other well, but we exchanged a few words, then wandered in the same general direction to get our shots. Maybe 20 minutes in, I realized I had lost sight of Nikki. I figured she'd just gone ahead or circled back to the group. I wasn't too concerned. I was in the middle of photographing a broken-down wooden bridge when I heard someone walking behind me. I turned, expecting Nikki, but it was a man. He looked older than the rest of us, probably mid-30s, wearing a dark blue windbreaker and jeans. He had a camera slung over his shoulder. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was a teaching assistant, or another student I hadn't noticed before. He gave me a small nod and walked past me onto the bridge. I followed from a distance, partly curious, partly cautious. But as he reached the other side, he turned around and just stared. Not at the trees or the scenery, but directly at me. No expression, just this unsettling, fixed gaze. I gave a polite smile, then looked away and started heading back the way I came. The hairs on my arms were standing up. By the time I rejoined the main group, The sky had gone dark, and most of the students were gathered by the shuttle, chatting, comparing photos, and eating snacks. I scanned the crowd. I didn't see the man. Maybe he had already returned his equipment or went to speak with the professor. We boarded the shuttle and began heading back to campus. I sat near the middle. As we pulled out of the park, I looked toward the rear-view mirror at the back of the bus and saw him, the man in the windbreaker, sitting in the last row. My heart sank. Nobody else seemed to notice. He was quiet, still, just looking forward. I leaned toward Nikki, who had ended up sitting next to me again. "Hey, do you know that guy in the back?" She glanced quickly, shook her head. "I thought he was with you." I don't think he's in our class." That's when the anxiety really kicked in. Back at campus, everyone started getting off the bus. I waited until most people had gotten off before I stood. As I stepped down onto the pavement, I looked back. The man was still sitting there, not moving. When I finally saw him step off the shuttle, he didn't head toward any of the dorms. He just stood by a tree near the edge of the lot, watching. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I didn't say anything to Mr. Dillon. I just hurried toward my dorm. It was about a 7-minute walk across campus. The night was cold and there weren't many people out. I walked fast, eyes forward, but halfway to my dorm, I felt it. That sinking feeling, like I was being followed. I glanced over my shoulder. There he was, the man in the windbreaker, walking slowly, just barely keeping pace, not trying to hide. I sped up. So did he. At one point, I pretended to take a phone call. "Yeah, I see you outside the dorm. I'm almost there," I said loudly. He didn't stop. I didn't run, but I moved fast. My key card was already in my hand as I approached the dorm doors. I swiped, opened, and stepped inside, pushing hard to shut the door behind me. I looked through the glass. He stood there, staring at me. He didn't try to open the door. He just stood, still, eyes locked on mine. I backed away and called campus security immediately. They said they'd send someone. I went to the 3rd floor, but I couldn't resist looking out the lobby-facing window. He was gone. The next day, I reported everything to the campus police. They took it seriously, checked shuttle security footage. But here's the strangest part. They said only 20 students boarded the bus. They verified each one with sign-in sheets and facial recognition from student IDs. No one matching my description of the man was ever accounted for. He was never seen on campus again. To this day, I don't know who he was, how he got on that bus, or what he wanted. But sometimes, late at night, I still see someone in a dark blue windbreaker standing across the street, just far enough that I can't be sure if it's him or my imagination.